Hello everyone, I'm Lucy. Today we will reveal the final secret of Aether. And its content may be a bit advanced. So I'll try to explain it in plain language. Okay, let's get to the main topic. We've been talking about the Aether for 3 whole episodes now. According to many scientists who support the Aether theory, space is full of ether. And it is the basic substance that makes up our physical universe. In that case, can we use ether to explain the various physical phenomena we know? For example, the 4 fundamental forces of the universe. Namely, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and gravity. Currently, in mainstream theoretical physics, quantum mechanics explains the first 3 forces, while general relativity is responsible for explaining gravity. However, these 2 theories contradict each other and cannot be combined. Therefore, the entire physics community is actually looking for a unified theory, such as string theory, M-theory, loop quantum theory, which are all currently popular alternative theories in mainstream physics. However, none of these theories have been confirmed by experiment. And they are all hypotheses based on the results of purely mathematical calculations. However, if people can understand the real history, they would realize how strange this blind exploration of our physical universe by the scientific community is. Because more than 100 years ago, Victorian scientists already touched on the essence of the universe, which is ether. In the physics of ether, whether it is the electromagnetic force or the strong and weak nuclear forces, or even gravity on a macro scale, they are all just different manifestations of the ether. In this episode, we will first explain the electromagnetic force and weak nuclear force in the ether universe from the perspective of Tesla. First, let's understand the definition of electromagnetic force in mainstream physics. Electromagnetic force is the collective name for the forces acting on charged particles in an electric field, magnetic field, or electromagnetic field. So how do electric and magnetic fields come about? According to mainstream physics, a static electric charge produces an electric field, while a moving electric charge produces a magnetic field. The alternating electric and magnetic fields form an electromagnetic field. So what is an electric charge? Mainstream physics tells us that an electric charge is a physical property of the elementary particles that make up matter. Well, that's as far as the explanation goes. As for how this physical property came about, mainstream physics cannot answer. And more importantly, since mainstream physics has eliminated the ether, it faces a thorny problem. How do these electric charges of static electricity interact with each other? Today, textbooks tell us that it is photons that transmit electromagnetic forces. Photons, which are quantum particles that act like waves and particles, can travel through a vacuum to transmit energy. Now let's see how ether physics explains this. Tesla believed that when the ether is in a state of uniform, disorderly flow, it appears electrically neutral. Static electricity is considered to be a kind of etheric pressure. The etheric space between electrostatically charged objects can be seen as the actual flow of ether particles from the negative pole to the positive pole. In other words, the electrostatic field is considered to be a rectified ether flow. From the perspective of etheric physics, static electricity is therefore actually the force that forces charged particles of all kinds to move in a rectified etheric flow. This is very important, and we will come back to it later. Since the etheric flow is very mobile between strong electric charges, it is natural that scientists thought they could extract energy from this flow. However, all attempts to intercept this directed flow of ether seem to have failed. But Tesla began to realize through experimentation that their failure was due to a lack of suitable materials and systems. This was because previous scientists had usually used metal, and the flow of ether in the metal inevitably generated an electric current. An electric current is actually the movement of electrons, which is something Tesla was keen to avoid. Tesla said that so-called electromagnetic induction was actually the result of existing technological limitations. we can see that all current electromagnetic induction technology uses electrons, rather than ether, to achieve the exchange of forces. However, electrons are not the ultimate particles produced by nature, so they cannot provide an endless source of momentum. That said, we just said that an electrostatic field is a rectified ether flow, and that electrostatic force forces charged particles to move in an electrostatic field. So what are magnetic fields and magnetic forces? In fact, to Victorian scientists, the etheric vortex was the source of the magnetic field, and the magnetic force was the force that resisted or attracted particles with spin momentum in the etheric vortex. In mainstream physics, the magnetic field is the result of the movement of charged particles. However, since mainstream physics has eliminated the ether, once again, the magnetic force in the magnetic field has become a kind of superstrong force. So, in order to explain magnetism, mainstream physics proposes that there may be a virtual photon, which is responsible for transmitting magnetic force, just as photons transmit electromagnetic force. It should be noted that virtual photons have never been proven to exist. They only exist in computer simulations. Moreover, in my opinion, virtual photons, God particles, gravitons, bosons, and a series of other hypothetical particles that are said to transmit various particles are all theoretical substitutes that the scientific community has to find because it does not acknowledge the universal etheric medium in the universe. They actually violate Occam's razor, making a naturally simple and clear concept complex and strange. Incidentally, both quantum physicist Paul Dirac, who advocated an etheric universe, or the ECE theory based on the ether medium field, have predicted the existence of magnetic monopoles. However, for a long time, mainstream science has believed that magnetic fields are formed by the movement of charged particles. And according to Gauss' law, magnetic fields are always closed, with magnetic south and north poles always appearing in pairs. However, a recent piece of news has completely overturned this view. Just 10 months ago, on December 5, 2023, the University of Cambridge published a paper on the use of diamond quantum technology in iron oxide. The news did not receive as much attention as the discovery of superconductivity at room temperature, but it was indeed a groundbreaking discovery in physics. For the first time, humans had discovered magnetic monopoles in nature, and the predictions of ECE theory were completely confirmed. Of course, the above is not a comprehensive explanation of electromagnetism. After all, there is very little information on ether physics, and we can only find clues from past information. However, in the many ether-related theories of subsequent scientists, there will be further discussions, which we will talk about at a later opportunity. After talking about electromagnetism, next we try to use ether physics to understand the weak force, one of the four fundamental forces, which causes the natural radioactive decay of atomic nuclei. In the standard model of particle physics, the theory of the weak interaction, i.e. the weak force, states that it is caused by the exchange of bosons. Once again, mainstream physics makes particles the medium for transmitting forces, for the simple reason that they have ruled out the ether as a medium for transmitting information and energy, and therefore had to find a replacement for particles as the medium for transmitting force. However, Tesla discovered in his experiments that when ether energy strikes a conductive material at the right pulse interval, the ether flow interacts with matter at the atomic level. In order to further investigate this interaction, Tesla designed various incredible vacuum tubes. These were very similar to modern military vacuum electron tubes. Tesla used oil, plating, and aluminium as targets in the vacuum tubes, and he discovered that these heavier metals produced a wide range of polluting particle emissions when bombarded by an etheric current. It is the resistance of the elements and other substances that produces so many energetic particles. The carriers of this etheric current are so small that they reveal the internal atomic spacing of crystalline matter. Small crystals such as metals or precious stones produce characteristic dotted patterns on the surface of the bulb. It became clear that the ether particles, which Tesla called neutral subatomic particles of radiant energy, actually passed through the material on the electrodes from the inside out. Tesla realized that natural radioactivity is the result of the etheric flow of the universe continuously bombarding suitable substances with an atomic cross-section. Substances that we consider to be radioactive usually have a densely packed atomic lattice. And the arrangement of these lattices has a particular atomic symmetry, which can intercept and diffract the incoming etheric flow, and exhibit continuous outward emission of particles and energy, producing radioactive emissions. Now, let's sum up. In other words, in the etheric worldview, both the electromagnetic force and the weak force originate from the movement of the ether. The pressure of the ether forms the electrostatic field, and the particles are driven by the etheric flow in the electrostatic field. The etheric vortex forms the magnetic field, and the etheric flow impacts the atomic lattice, which is reflected and diffracted under appropriate circumstances, which is the source of natural radioactivity. This simple and powerful explanation does not require any additional physical variables. More importantly, these are theories derived from Tesla's countless proven experimental results, not just computer simulation concepts. As we know, the current mainstream standard particle model has discovered a total of 61 elementary particles, including the fermion and boson, which was developed based on the Yang-Mills theory proposed by Yan Qinming and Robert Mills in 1954. Although this set of standard particle models can well explain the forces of 3 of the 4 fundamental particles, namely the strong force, the weak force and the electromagnetic force, as observed in experiments, but it cannot explain gravity. Therefore, although this standard particle model seems to have taken the commanding heights of mainstream theoretical physics, as has quantum mechanics, even the Large Hadron Collider in Europe has invested €20 billion, which is said to be used to search for various exotic new particles. However, the scientific community understands that this standard particle model is not the ultimate theory. In fact, it doesn't make sense intuitively. How could the creator have created so many elementary particles? Back at the beginning of the last century, Tesla realized when studying the properties of the ether that the so-called elementary particles that physicists have been pursuing were in fact just a byproduct of the ether flowing against resistance. By limiting their thinking to separate particle types, scientists ignored the most fundamental dynamics of the universe. In fact, more than 60 years before the birth of high-energy physics, in April 1887, Nikola Tesla began using his own design of high-voltage vacuum tubes to study X-rays. Tesla was the first to invent the single-electrode X-ray tube, and he was also the first to alert the scientific community to the possible harm these cathode rays could cause to living organisms. However, he did not publish his findings. So today we all think that Röntgen was the first to discover X-rays. But for Tesla, he actually did not care about the right to discover a new type of ray, because he was after the essence of the operation of the universe. For Tesla, the X-ray was merely a byproduct of the radiation emitted by electrons colliding with a contaminated stream of ether. What really excited Tesla was that at a certain pulse rate, the radiation emitted by his system had all the characteristics of light but was invisible. Tesla called them dark rays or dark light. Tesla discovered that these dark rays could pass through several walls and produce images on a fluorescent screen. However, please note that these effects are not X-rays, because X-rays are reflected back by thick metal walls. But his dark rays can pass through all objects without hindrance. This dark ray is much more powerful than our current so-called X-ray projector. It could do much more than just take a chest X-ray or examine luggage. Tesla's transmitter could charge objects from a distance, move objects through the air, and even pierce objects with a few holes. In short, by controlling the pulse rate, any level of energy can be delivered along the beam. In fact, a scientist also discovered this mysterious dark ray. In the early 1890s, the scientist Gustave Le Bon built a home laboratory and reported in 1896 that he had observed a dark light. He believed that this new radiation was different from both X-rays and alpha particles, and that this black light was probably the dark radiation that Tesla had observed in his experiments. Having heard this, you may think that Gustave Le Bon was a physicist unfamiliar to us. In fact, he was a medical doctor, sociologist and psychologist, and physics was just a hobby. I only need to name a book for everyone to know. The Crowd, written by Le Bon. Le Bon was therefore definitely a standard polymath, and he was even nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903. Gustave Le Bon believed that the transformation of energy into matter and matter into energy presupposed a basic substance, and that ether was this substance. Theoretically, concentrated ether can be made to flow through any substance, thereby producing new elements and high-energy radiation. From this we can see that for Victorian scientists, the gradual process of matter becoming energy or energy becoming matter took place in the etheric continuum, rather than a fixed number of energy quanta. Quantum physics is applicable to a very specific area of energy exchange, but it is not the essential thing. Tesla also discovered in his experiments that if etheric impulses of a specific frequency are directed at matter, etheric radiation impulses can penetrate the atomic lattice of the material and explode in it. The material is directly evaporated and converted into electrons and other particles. Tesla said that the ether pulse is like a very small hammer, transforming matter from the inside into pure energy. This series of experiments was carried out in the ether lamp invented by Tesla. Tesla placed various types of jewelry, light metals, heavy metals, non-metals, and radioactive substances into the bulb one after the other and exposed them to a continuous stream of ether. The materials that were dematerialized at first left behind a faint stain in the bulb, but soon even these disappear completely in the continuous ether flow. This is why Tesla was convinced that there is a smooth transition between energy and matter. Therefore, the dematerialization of matter can be achieved when the appropriate ether flow hits the matter. So much for 3 episodes on Tesla's journey from discovery to understanding of the ether, and his profound insights into its properties. Although Tesla was probably the first scientist to study the properties of the ether, he was definitely not the only one, nor the last. After Tesla, there were many outstanding scientists and inventors who also caught a glimpse of the true nature of ether. Without exception, these people were all involved in anti-gravity, zero-point energy, and influencing the world. In the next episode, we will use the physics of the ether to explain the mysterious force of gravity, which is closely related to anti-gravity technology.